I guess some of the essence of relationships. Interesting. Maybe I
Sondheim,
should
man.
revisit this musical. I don't know why I remember it just like being so stressful.
This
Well,
feels stressful, so
they have to find a bunch of stuff. Welcome to Attached, a podcast about the loved ones we're attached to and the good, the bad, and the ugly advice about those relationships that maybe we shouldn't be so attached to. We here at Attached want to share ways to enhance your relationships and debunk all that bad relationship advice using science. I'm Dr. Patricia Robertson out of the University of Tennessee.
I'm Dr. Sarah Witz at UT Southwestern Medical Center.
And I'm Dr. Sessa Nagash from San Diego State University.
Today's session will bring us a conversation about what reality TV dating shows remind us about being ready to date. Ready. Ooh, I'm very interested in what that ready means. Then we're going to jump to our academic deep dive segment and discuss a new academic article, Associations Between Vocal Arousal and Dyadic Coping During Couple Interactions After a Stress Induction. So I assume this is like a lab type study?
It is.
Very cool. We haven't had one of those in a while, so that'll be really cool to dive into in the academic deep dive. Get it? And then in good or bad advice, we will talk about some advice from Stephen Sondheim. Bring a little Broadway to the scene. So that'll be very interesting and intriguing. I'm trying hard not to sing the lyrics when I do it. No one wants to hear that. Am I right? So as always, if you have any advice you'd like us to talk about, send it to us. You can email us at attachedpodcast@gmail.com or tweet us, Facebook us, Instagram us, all at Attached Podcast, or go straight to attachedpodcast.com and send us a message. As always, for bonus content and to support this wee little podcast of ours, please go to our Patreon page and consider becoming a patron. That website is patreon.com/attached. Also, as always, wherever you listen to our podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe. Well, we have a really great episode. I'm super excited about all of the content we're going to dig into. But before we get to all of that, I'm so curious. How are you guys doing? What's up? What's new in your world? Happy spring. What's going on?
Well, spring brings softball season. Technically, fall also brings softball season, which is, So I don't know if that's an age thing or if that's just now how we do this. We just do all sports, all seasons.
You guys.
It's been an interesting test of my...
I can't wait to see what adjective this is.
I'm not really sure how to describe it. My capacity as a parent to... be emotionally supportive from the sideline while also not getting so emotionally involved that I'm causing problems. It's
the capacity to find balance.
It's one of those things that I think I thought that parents that got very, very into watching their kids play sports, they were suffering from some sort of deficit of some sort. And I'm not a judgmental person too much by nature. This has challenged me, but I'm not judging the player so much as my child has jumped up an age group. Okay. And I would say collectively they've jumped back a skill level. And I don't know if you all have watched the movie The Little Giants. Came out in the 90s. It was about like a ragtag crew of kids who really are not cut out to play football, but really want to. And they're like coached to be able to like play together. It's what it's like watching my child's team, where some of the other children appear to be ready for professional athletics. And
really,
our team is pretending to swim to first base. They are supposed to be getting ready to bat and like calling out to their teammates like, wow, look at the moon. I mean, it is like extremely challenging to be like, wow, look at you guys, you're working really hard. And the teams they've come up against so far are stealing home, right? That's like all the runs are being made. They don't even have to even work that hard. They're stealing home over and over. So anyways, it's been an interesting few months for me. We're about halfway through the season, maybe a little bit further than that.
I understand.
And yeah, it's a lot.
Are you shouting things like pay attention?
So the head coach was away this past weekend, and I was told that I would help substitute, like step in. But several of the dads sort of swarmed the field, knowing that would be the case. And so I felt like, okay, well, maybe the sideline's just for me today, which is fine. But nobody was paying attention to the swarm of children in the outfield. So I tried yelling, like, softball ready, because that's what they're supposed to be cute. Several of these girls slowly looked to the side, looked at me like, who the hell are you? And then just went back to just idling, just doing nothing.
You have a bunch of David Roses in your outfield.
Oh, that would be fun. These children are delightful. They're so sweet. They all have, it's like a mix of personality, like girls at 9 and 10, like, oh my God, so fun. And so, no, I'm not yelling much of anything anymore. I tried that a few times. And
it sounds like you're trying to bring some structure, though, and you're trying to keep them safe. Because in softball, you have to be mindful of things that are like, that's how they presented it to my son's team, is like, this is a safety concern when you're sitting there picking grass instead of looking at the ball that's coming your way.
Right.
Like, that is.
Well, and I felt like we evolved past that. Like, they're a little old.
Exactly.
They're just not quite in it. It's a lot of people shouting, like, the ball's coming towards you, and then watching it fly back past a child and yelling, like, it's you. It's fine. It's just
it's fine.
It's a mixed skill level. That's so
funny. No. I feel you on that. I get like it's in a different age. When Dre was doing it at 4, I was like, why are we choosing to spend 2 days a week doing this if he's just going to sit and pick grass? Like, we don't have to, right? Like, this is not a thing for him in his life that's going to ultimately make or break him. Like, let's just walk away.
How enriching is this?
Yeah, like, if he's not focused and enjoying it, what are we doing here?
Sure.
But it was definitely entertaining. Like, there were stories to be told at dinner, like, hey, how was that grass picking? And, did you notice the team around you?
Notice the team around you? Yeah.
That's amazing. Sesson, what's going on in your world?
So, I have been experiencing what I have described as travel planning anxiety. I don't know if there's an actual, like, syndrome for this, but I think it's really been interesting. We've been planning a trip to Europe for years, and every year something or another, of course, has come and got in the way of that. This year I said I am going by myself if no one is gonna come with me. It was one of those, like, you can tell I'm not messing around anymore. I'm gonna go to Europe. But I have put really no effort into planning it. Every time I do, I get so anxious about it that I just walk away from my computer. And I'm starting to realize that it's an actual pattern that I'm doing, right? Before it was just like, I was making excuses for why I wasn't able to sit and just plan some aspect of it out. And now I'm actively avoiding it. And at the same time, trying to be excited about the trip and knowing like I'm going on this trip. I really want it. So I don't know what to make of that. Like, I usually am very disciplined when I want something. I'll usually make myself, get involved and put the work and time in. But I'm curious, what do you all think is my problem? Like, I'm really actively avoiding this planning. And I don't know if I've just put too much weight into wanting this trip that I now don't want to plan anything that might not live up to what in my mind I really want. I think there's part of that for sure, because I'm like, there's so many options. I just finally narrowed down the 3 countries, and now I'm like, what do I do with that? I don't know.
Countries, yeah. I think definitely. I don't know what your problem is, but I would say Sarah probably is better at that game. There's a reason why I quit therapy. But one of the things that helped me was think of it maybe more as like a tasting tour, like not as in food, but like there's literally no way I can see everything, but like see 1 or 2 things. But then also remember, like, part of being, for me, going on like a vacation is also to relax. So working in a day, like we would only do excursions or, go see a place or do something every other day. So one day we would just hang out at the house or wherever we're renting and go. Maybe what we do that day is go walk around and find a grocery store and go like, look at there, like, just really chill and like hang out. And then the next day we plan a traveling tour or, something that takes us in a car or something like that. So that really helped me because it was just like, okay, we're going to do a very small handful of things that are available, but also we're just going to enjoy the Europe, right? Because they're more chill than we are over here in the States.
Yeah.
So that helped me a lot, like lower my expectations that like, there's literally no way I can see everything. And like literally no way I can even see like a 10th of the stuff that's there. So just pick one or two. Oh,
Ooh.
your face suggests that is not something that maps on for you at all.
I'm anxious just about hearing your story because it's like,
in her head, it's, what do you mean I can't see everything?
Yeah, right. That's what
but
her
what do
eyes
you
were saying
mean
to
I
me.
take a day off for my vacation? That's the part that I'm like self-regulating about right now.
Yeah, you hang out on the porch, eat some lovely cheese and wine. You
and
watch.
So that would be my plan for half an hour of the day. And then I'd be like, okay, what are we doing next? Like, I'm not someone
I don't want to go on that vacation with you.
No, you don't, because I really am like, my thing is YOLO. Like,
why?
I don't know that I'll ever be back
her.
there again. And I want to
crush it.
I want to capture it all. Right. And I'm not saying like every second of the day has to be planned, but it has to be a really fairly.
Yeah, but if you're tired, are you going to enjoy it?
I won't be tired. I love traveling.
Okay.
I really enjoy. I love the
Will
eating.
your family be tired?
Watching. I don't know, maybe, but they can hang back. I'm good with they can hang back. I have been very clear that I've waited for a really long time. So when I'm there, I'm going to really capitalize on the experience. Because I just don't know that I ever want to go back to the same country more than once. I have this idea of traveling the world. So, Spain, I just need to check it off the list and make sure I've done as much as I can, knowing I'm not going to see everything. But that's where I'm like,
no, I mean,
yeah.
This maps on certainly to your personality.
Yeah, exactly. Very consistent.
Trailblazer. You're a trailblazer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were the first one to have ever gone to Spain. Colonize it back.
Sounds like
no.
It sounds like you're just needing some structure and some safety. And I'm busy doing that for a softball team. Someone wise just told me recently. So I could probably help you with this too. It feels like 100%. Yeah. You're just needing a little bit of structure.
I do. That's why I was like, tell me what your experience was. Is it worth, I don't want to take a chance on any day of my trip. So you both will be hearing from me, given how you recently have traveled to Europe and
100%
had experiences. So I'll be in touch.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to hear how this trip goes next season. So an interesting thing has been happening here at this UT campus. I have been, and maybe it's a spring phenomenon, I'm not really sure, but I walk along and I see a discarded pair of boxer briefs of very colors. It has happened to me on 4 different occasions in the past 2 months. I'm not sure what, I assume they're students. I'm not sure what is happening on campus when I'm not on it. But I have seen blue ones. I have seen red ones. I'm not sure what's happening. It is wild. And also, who's not picking them up? I mean, I guess I'm not picking them up. So that explains that.
So you're contributing to the problem.
I'm contributing to the problem.
Now we know.
But can you imagine walking through wherever you are and that's the only pair of clothing that's discarded. It's not like their gym bag got dumped out. It's just a pair of clothing. And it's their boxer briefs.
I have 2 questions because my investigator hat goes on.
Sure.
I have 2 questions.
Are they
male?
Right. Okay. And are they the same brand?
Oh, you know what? I didn't pay that much attention. I am so sorry.
That could tell you if they're planted or not.
Oh.
Right.
Well, one of them was in a bush, and you could tell it had been there a while because the rain had made it go into it molded to the bush. I just don't know what these gentlemen are doing with their underwear just discarded.
They're probably in the bush waiting for somebody to help them. And you're just like, well, that's weird. And you just keep walking.
Nobody's taking the sign.
Oh, no one's helping them.
Yeah. Lots of questions.
What was your second question? Do I know the brand?
Well, the brand is the first question, and then the location of it. Are they within the same area?
No, one was over at the gym, which is on one side of the campus, and the other one was in my parking lot, which is the other side of campus. Like,
and do you have a map with pins where you have located?
There is a
I'm gonna put it
pattern.
up in my office, and then when the dean comes by and was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
you have
right.
with these pins. Why do you have?" And then I'll explain. I've been tracking underwear of students, and then I'd get in trouble.
Tenure.
Hashtag immediate tenure.
You solved the case of the briefs. Yes.
The briefs on campus. Oh my word. It's been very silly. I'm gonna look to my side and be like, there's another pair. What is happening? Spring fever, I guess. I'm not really sure.
Spring fever.
First up, Poppin Culture. We learn about relationships from our friends and families, but a lot of what we think about love and relationships come from what we see in pop culture. For this first segment, we take a moment to highlight events in pop culture that influence people's lives and how we view relationships. Sesson, what you got for us? Can't wait.
Yeah, so admittingly, I've been binge watching some reality dating shows. Love is Blind 4 came out recently, and
Netflix,
and I definitely got back onto that. And after many years of like avoiding it, I decided to watch a season of Married at First Sight. That's, I think, the name of the show. And that's the one where people literally walk down the aisle and meet the person that they're going to marry right there and then stay married for a couple months and decide,
contractually,
to see if they actually want to stay together. And at the end of that 2 months, they have like a decision day where they decide to stay together or annul, I guess, their marriage. So I've only seen one of like what I think are like 12 or 13 seasons. I know it's had many seasons and been on for many years, but I couldn't find anything one night, and I was like, I'll start watching this. And of course, all it takes is 1 or 2 episodes, and you've got me hooked, hook, line, and sinker. So in watching both of these pretty much around the same time, of course, my brain always starts to look for patterns. And, I just notice, I'm reminded of just how much people lack self-awareness when they're pursuing serious relationships. I'm not talking about casual dating, but like people who are, attempting to find real deep connections and pursue serious long-term relationships, marriages, so forth. And, what I notice, not just on these shows, but I also see it, right, in couples in real life, is that people often, when they're having, from relationship to relationship, like difficulties finding stability and like a good fit, they often look to the external world to make sense of why that is, or to sort of on some level like put the accountability onto some context or the other person or whatever it might be. And I'm just not convinced that people are doing the work that's necessary on themselves to really be in a healthy, stable relationship and find a really fitting partner. These shows really sort of just really highlight that for me quite a bit. And I don't know, it leaves me feeling pretty sad for people because I think there's so much pain and suffering that can happen within relationships when people are really not in a place where they are doing the work to grow personally, to really understand their own histories and their own sort of mental and emotional wellness. And there's just a lot that they experience and then also that transpires in the relationship as a result. So, and people do this going from one relationship to the other without taking that pause to really, like, again, do the work, heal, process. And I'm just thinking, like, it happens so commonly in our culture that to me it speaks to a larger societal systemic issue that we have around how we are really educating people to understand what it takes to be in a healthy relationship and what it should look like when a relationship no longer is serving them well. It's a big conversation. I guess what I'm not
Right.
bringing up is not something that could be, solved for, of course, at all in any easy way, but like even discussed in an easy way. But it just reminded me, like watching these couples who are like really seeking like long-term commitments, who are just not doing the work on themselves to like get there. It's like constantly like looking to the other person to like change and fix themselves and do these things that they think are going to solve for some of the pretty significant issues in their relationship. So yeah, it just brought up some questions for me, around whether or not to that people will go into a relationship for the sake of trying to better themselves, right? Like if I find someone who I think has all the qualities that I don't have, or has the qualities that are going to enhance my qualities, whatever, that's going to be enough, rather than to really take that time to do that work for themselves, and then also with the partner. Of course, it's not just that we grow and are better versions of ourselves, on our own. Like relationships can bring that out, but how much of that are we really, trying to seek out in the relationship, as opposed to trying to find that balance? And then also why people stay in relationships with individuals who don't acknowledge on their side that there are things that they need to do to grow as well. Like there are just a lot of dynamics that I've been observing in these shows that just make me go, oh my gosh, we have so much to do. People need so much support in how to like really do this relationship thing better. Like it is so fundamental to who we are and our whole life trajectories and the children that we have and our life satisfaction. And it's just, we're not figuring out how to really intentionally go into relationships in better spaces, in better ways. Yeah.
And I think what you just said is probably one of the crux of it. I think that there are many answers to it, but the fact that you said it's so fundamental to us, I think a lot of people enter in relationships or have the belief that this should come naturally, right? Because it is so fundamental. So many people have relationships, and throughout time, really, right, these romantic relationships in particular. And also we're taught in pop culture, right, that these kind of things should come naturally, and being in relationships should be easy and natural, and you shouldn't have to put work into figuring out how to communicate effectively. And these are skills that we're just kind of born with. But obviously that's not the case. So I do wonder if that is one of the big corners of kind of the concern that you're bringing up, is this belief that, if I don't do it naturally, then there's something internally flawed with me, and not necessarily something I can work on, maybe.
Yeah.
So I wondered, because your expertise, like what it means to put the work in to be able to sort of focus on yourself and become more self-aware, etc. I'm wondering if you were describing that process of doing work on yourself in like to other people who are interested, who maybe aren't, therapist background, etc. How would you describe what that includes?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. I think one of the things that I think sometimes people have to do is really pause to recognize, like, what are the areas that I continue to sort of run up against that people are giving me like feedback about, or areas where I see relationally, like there's something here, right? There's some tension here. And really try to see, like, and this is not to assume that because you try to do the self-work that it comes easy, right? There's a lot of things that we try to reflect on sometimes that aren't easy for us because there's trauma there. There's, the fact that we need sometimes the other person from our past or even our present to help give us some feedback to help us do the processing. But I do think like taking the time, one, to take accountability for, like, there is a way that we show up in relationships that has to do with what we are doing and how we are reacting, and not just the other person. So just always having a level of accountability in a relationship. Like I always say to my partner and to my couples, like, this might seem like a very, very clear, you're to blame, I'm not kind of situation, but there is almost always two people to sort of take accountability in any kind of conflict that arises, right? Like, and accountability doesn't mean blame, you're wrong, I'm right kind of thing. It just means recognizing what you can do, what your part is in contributing to a dynamic that needs to be worked on. And so part of like accountability seems to sometimes really be missing when I'm watching people in relationships. So knowing how to take accountability, right? What that looks like, and then deciding where do you go to do the work. Some people turn to spirituality, right? Some people will turn to therapy. Some people will turn to leaning into other relationships and trying to get honest feedback about like, okay, how do you feel like I show up in our relationship? Are there things you wish that I would try to be more acknowledging of, or, you know, things like that. And of course, there's other resources out there. There's self-help material, right? There's doing that work internally and doing meditation or whatever it might be. There's different mechanisms available to us for doing the work on ourselves and self-reflecting and processing and all of that. But I do think being intentional in that effort. It's not just, oh, I need to think about what I'm doing. Like, what does that actually look like? Like, what does it mean? And to be consistent in that effort, because we're constantly growing and exposing ourselves to things in our world, and our worldviews are always shifting and evolving. So like not just taking a moment in time to do the work, but constantly recognizing that part of existing is part of like taking time and effort to really turn inward. And I don't, you know, think doing it all the time is also necessarily helpful. There are people who seek way too much insight and get totally debilitated by that and don't connect emotionally to themselves as a result. So there has to be ability to really look inwards and not always look for someone else or something else to explain your feelings or your unhappiness or whatever tensions you might be having. So I know that was sort of a long-winded statement.
No, I think it's really helpful because I think I understand and totally agree with what you're saying. And also, if I'm not hearing what you're saying with a real understanding of what does that look like, if I'm somebody that's maybe not doing that and sort of making sort of repeated similar sort of mistakes or patterns or ways of engaging in relationships across relationships, I might therefore not know what that means when you're saying do the work in and out of relationships. And so I think it's really helpful that you're sort of spelling out not only why that's so important, but what that can look like. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. And I think maybe one of the things that's preventing people is sometimes that work is really painful and it hurts a lot and it's really hard to do. Like looking at and some people might label it like this and I wouldn't, but some people may, and which makes it probably even more painful is thinking of it as like, oh, failures in this and failures in that can sometimes be really hard to look at and sit with. And I think if that's something that is kind of speaking true to you, it's hard to kind of reflect on these things. I think that's particularly when having a third party like a therapist might be really helpful to bring in to help you process that, or bring in with your partner and your couple to help you go through these steps in a way that you're not deep diving into pain and like welling in there and getting lost in the pain of that too, because you need to be able to come out the other side of it, right? So just be mindful if you're having a hard time, trouble doing that, it's too hard, then find someone that can help you navigate through that.
Exactly. Find a trusted person. It doesn't have to be a therapist if that's not your jam, but it's like someone who cares about you enough to have some difficult dialogue, uncomfortable dialogue maybe, or your partner who's, you know, finding a partner who's always willing to help you talk through some of the internal stuff that you might be experiencing, and vice versa. I think any healthy relationship requires both partners be able to say vulnerably, I'm struggling in this way sometimes, and I want to talk through that with you, right? And if you can't do that, that's really tough. But you don't want to isolate yourself in that way when you're trying to work on your growth and trying to like pull yourself out of any connection to people in that effort to not want to burden them with it or feel crazy for acknowledging what you're feeling. Like you have to, on some level, stay connected to people when you're doing that self-work. And it just could look differently for different people. So
I think sometimes we're talking about it like it's work and it's hard and it can be painful. And other times, I mean, a lot of times I think it can also be a relief. It's an investment in yourself and the people you care about. It's a measure of commitment and devotion and loyalty. And I think it can be scary, what you're describing, but also it can be an enormous relief of like I can sort of understand more about what I need in a relationship or how I affect people around me, and why also that's really important and why I matter, and people can validate that for me. So I think sometimes we talk about the work we put into relationships in a way that people hear like, I mean, who wants it? No one's like, oh, we're going to work harder, just like apply more and more of the same solution, like over and over. Right.
Yeah.
But really, if you really can sort of pause, like you're saying, slow down and self-reflect and consider where to shift gears, sometimes it's effort, but it's actually easier in the long run. It's less painful. It's not hitting your head against the same wall over and over. It's finding doors instead, which I think can be quite lovely.
Yeah, well said.
I love doors. In this episode's academic deep dive, we're talking about new research that explores how couples cope with stress in a new article titled Associations Between Vocal Arousal and Dyadic Coping During Couple Interactions After Stress Induction by Dr. Lisanne Bulling at the University of Zurich and her colleagues, recently published in the International Journal of Applied Positive Psychology. This research explores how partners talk about recent stressful experiences with each other and how they cope with this stress together, a process that's called dyadic coping. So dyadic to coping with the stress. Although we know how stress in our lives can spill over to affect partners and contribute to feeling less satisfied with our relationship, dyadic coping can mitigate some of these stress effects. But what matters is how a stressed person communicates about their stress, how their partner responds to the stress communication by providing support, and how the support they provide may help the person who experienced the initial stress. So a cycle. Beautiful. But we haven't understood this process very well until now, ladies and gentlemen. The research we're discussing in today's academic deep dive explores each step in this dyadic coping process, starting with how do people communicate about their stress in a way their partners can understand, as well as how listening partners empathize and provide the support that is so key for couples' well-being. Sarah, I'm all ears, not at all feeling stressed, which is very rare for me, so that's good. So I'm in this state of being able to listen. Can you please tell us about this super cool new research study?
Yeah, I think what's important to sort of cover first before talking about the experiment that they did in this project is that they're focused on communication and communicating about stress, but communication happens in lots of different ways, right? So we have verbal communication where we might feel stressed or have like be stressed at work. And then we come home and we describe what happened at work. We describe the event. We talk about how we feel, but it's also very nonverbal. And so if I'm nervous, you can probably read that off my body language. If I'm really excited, you can read my gestures, my facial expressions. And then there's a third kind of communication called paraverbal communication, which is changes in tone of voice. And so just like you just described, Patricia, it's really important to think about all the different ways in which we communicate, not just with our partners. This is true across people we communicate with, because unambiguous communication of stress is really how other people accurately understand and then are able to respond to why I'm stressed and the fact that I'm stressed in a way that really meets my needs, right? So thinking about, are they listening to me? Are they showing that they're being really attentive and tuning in and providing understanding and encouragement? They first have to understand that I was stressed in the first place. And that paraverbal communication contains a lot of information about our emotions that we're experiencing, so that what these authors are really focused on is the voices, what they refer to as the fundamental frequency. So this is the rate of vocal cord vibration, or what we hear as voice pitch. So people can infer a speaker's emotions from their voice with pretty high accuracy. So more so than if, right, in studies where we measure like heart rate, if you're really stressed and your heart rate goes up, I can't tell that your heart rate is up. I'm busy maybe looking at your facial expressions and your body language, but I don't know that your heart rate went up.
Right.
But in just regular day-to-day interactions, when you hear a person's vocal pitch go up, you can pretty accurately infer that they're highly aroused, that they're experiencing some intense emotion. And that's true for positive or negative emotions, but that voice pitch is something we don't research very often. The other piece that they're really interested in is this idea of emotional resonance. So in couples, another way to understand the emotions that a partner is experiencing is by feeling a similar level of emotional arousal. So feeling what our partner feels, which is a little bit more automatic. It's different than that cognitive piece of understanding what my partner feels. So it's that empathic resonance of stress, and they're looking at both. So they did that through, yes, you're right, a lab study, an experiment where they brought in 198 mixed gender couples who were together at least a year, between 20 to 45 years old. And what they did was they first left them alone in the lab for 8 minutes while they video recorded them in the natural interaction, just how they would typically talk. There's no guidance here. And then either the male partner or the female partner or both underwent a stress induction task. So in this lab, they used a pretty standardized way to super stress out your research participants. They put them through like a mock job interview, a mental arithmetic test. Like there's like a pretty standardized way they do that.
Yeah.
But whether it was one partner or both, they weren't there while their partner was being stressed. They were in the waiting room or they were in another room themselves being mock job interviewed. And then they were returned to the waiting room together and recorded for another 8 minutes so that they could observe how they coped with that stress and responded to each other. And so what they found was that when women were stressed, when they went through the stress experience, but not their male partners, men's voice pitch was also observed to change. And that was significantly linked with the support they provided their partner, which in turn was associated with how satisfied the women felt with their partner's efforts to cope. Whereas when men were stressed, but their female partners weren't, men's voice pitch was linked to women's supports that they provided their male partner. So women's coping behavior, their supportive behavior was tied to the changes that they could hear in their male partners' voices, and that was linked to how satisfied they were with the support they got. When they were both stressed and then reunited, women's own voice changes was linked to providing their partner with support. And that was associated with men being satisfied, and less so in the other direction. So women resonated with their partner when they were both stressed, and men really appreciated that support. So whereas women cued into changes in their male partner's voice, that vocal stress, to understand and then really sort of maybe also attune to their own stress experiences, they were doing that paraverbal communication. They could hear those changes. They could also resonate, but men were more likely to feel what their partner felt, and then they felt stressed themselves, and that was more likely to move them to support, only if they themselves didn't come into that situation also stressed. Okay. So it could be that men are more sort of expressing that stress more explicitly, like maybe their voice change is just sort of more obvious, or women are maybe overall sort of better attuned to that paraverbal stress communication. But either way, whatever's cueing somebody in to support their partner when they're picking up on the stress, that is related to whether or not their partner is satisfied. Like, are you picking up on the fact that I'm upset, right? So there are some limitations of this project. I mean, the data are a little bit old, which is okay. That happens too. It's a pretty complicated project. They also were measuring cortisol as something that they didn't report on here. So they had some really pretty intense ways in which they excluded possible participants. But in general, I think it's a really interesting project that really points to how dyadic coping, the ways in which we support our partners, is really powerful, but it's also very nuanced. Yeah. It's very, I mean, this is at the level of they took audio recordings and removed any background noise, removed laughter, and like coded frequency changes for each person and then looked at how they were linked. This is pretty nuanced stuff. We're not intentionally very often going in saying, I'm going to really convey, not just with the words I say, but with all part of me that I'm cued into my partner. But we can do that, right? Therapists trained to do that. Couples can also work on that too. Yeah. We can communicate. We've heard our partners are stressed explicitly with our words, but we can also shift how we speak to convey, like, we get it. This is hard. And then I'm going to tune into you and I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to offer encouragement and I'm going to show that I care about you, but I'm going to do that with my whole self. And when that is happening, of course, you're going to be more satisfied with that kind of support from your partner because they are showing you that they care 100%. So I just thought it was a really interesting experiment that was really very down to the nitty-gritty processes of how we communicate, which is really cool.
Yeah. Do you see this type of work being transferred to a therapist's office? I'm just curious how you might see that.
So I do think teaching couples how to attune to each other is a huge part of couples therapy. And that is sometimes at these very basic levels of what are you experiencing emotion-wise, and how can we help you tune into your own emotional experiences, and also how that shows up, like how you're conveying you're stressed, and then also breaking down how your partner reads that stress off you, and then how they respond. I mean, that is sort of the essence of couples therapy in a lot of different ways that couples therapy is done. That attuning process and really genuinely slowing couples down to help them understand when you are stressed, it's all over your face. It just immediately is coming off the surface of you. That floods your partner. And then when you feel like they're having to back up and pull out of those conversations, that's because they're overwhelmed. They don't know what to do with all of that. Did you know that you were that stressed and that's how that was showing up for you? Because we can shift both, right? We can shift how you convey, you're sharing that you're stressed so that your partner really understands it. But also then we can work on how they show up and support you in a way that fits what you're really needing in those moments. And that's not the same for everybody. So 100%, I think this is probably in the experimental level, what couples therapists have been working on for a while, but it's also showing that it really does matter, which I think is a really helpful addition to our research on what matters for couples.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of sometimes when we are reacting without understanding of where our reaction is coming from and how it gives the opportunity to provide some words to that. Like it helps explain that a little bit. You know, when we, like you described, pull back when our partner is perhaps not even saying anything yet, but like something about the way, the inflection in their voice, whatever is coming up, it is, you know, triggering our own fight or flight response, right? It could be true. And when our partner notices that, it could feel really hurtful, right? Like I'm trying to express something, you're pulling back, or the opposite even, right? Like you're getting reactive. And I think to help people understand, sometimes we react to just the way the other person is present to us. Like it comes, like you said, down to some of these really nuanced sort of ways of showing up that we don't always know how to pinpoint as human beings. Like, why did I just react to something without even having any information? Yeah. Right. Like
I didn't like it.
I didn't like it.
I don't like it.
And you hear partners saying like, I didn't even say that. Why would you be upset? Or why did you pull back? Like it gives some context to that. And on the other side, it gives the person who is having that physical reaction, right? Where their body and their voice is conveying information, the opportunity to recognize how they too can do work to regulate some of that so that their partner has the opportunity to show up in a more supportive way, attune better. Yeah. So it's good for both partners, I think, to really understand how to lean into some of those nonverbal cues that are critical.
Exactly. And to talk about that, like, let's say you were having this reaction and you know, you definitely, what you're saying could help work with self-regulation, but also you could talk about that. Like, I'm having a huge reaction right now. I'm not really sure why. Give me a second or something along those lines so your partner doesn't immediately, you know, withdraw like you guys were saying. But there's so many different ways that you can handle it once you know that this is going on, right? And this research is helping us really see how this fits into this system with couples.
Yeah. I think about couples too, where the person is really good with their words and uses like the approach of, I'm fine. I haven't said this or that, right? Like in a way to suggest like, I am a great communicator. It's you who's not. And really, speak someone like myself who can really articulate myself in moments of stress, but the inflection in my voice can really vary.
Right.
And if I have a partner who really picks up on that, which I do, I can get really frustrated when I'm like, but I'm not saying that. But he's like, but you're showing
I never
it.
said this was a problem.
I never said this, right? Or I'm being very calm in the way I'm approaching you about this. But there's all this inconsistent messaging in all the other ways I'm showing up. And they're reacting to that other stuff. But I privilege my verbal communication, right? And I think we all do. If I didn't say it, then you shouldn't be reacting in a certain way. But there's other ways clearly that we're communicating that we're not always, good at managing. Yeah.
Very cool.
Woohoo! Boo!
Woohoo! Yeah! Finally, time for good or bad advice, where we talk about pervasive relationship advice in our culture. We hear relationship advice from our parents, family, and friends. We see advice about how to be in relationships from movies and TV shows, reality shows for one, of course. And we read endless advice spewed at us on social media, blogs, numerous top 10 lists, and all sorts. But believe it or not, a lot of it just isn't actually good for our relationships. Some of it is, some of it's not. This is the part of the show where we use science, mind you, to decide if the advice is good or bad. Sometimes it's in the middle. If you have seen or heard some advice you'd like us to talk about, send it to us. Email us at attachedpodcast@gmail.com or get at us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all at Attached Podcast. Or just go straight to the source, attachedpodcast.com. So today we are going to do a deep dive into Stephen Sondheim. He is a famous lyricist and Broadway show writer. I don't think that's what they call him. Anyway, he passed away recently, not that recently, but also one of his most famous musicals, Into the Woods, has a revival currently on Broadway. And Into the Woods, if you're not familiar, go check it out. It's a movie now. But it's about bringing together all of these storybook characters. They all go into the woods, learn something about themselves, and then they come out different, of course. That's a really simple way of saying it. So we're going to go through a couple of different quotes through Into the Woods. Like I said, I'm going to not sing any of them, but well worth a listen. Ladies, have you guys ever seen Into the Woods?
I have not.
Parts of it. Yeah.
Okay.
I gave up like halfway through a few times. I don't know. I'm sorry. I was hoping you wouldn't ask.
No, it's okay. It is one of my favorites for sure. The original starred Bernadette Peters, the one and only.
I do know that. Yes, I know.
You don't know.
No, I do.
Okay.
I mean, she's incredible. And I do know her version of those songs.
Okay.
But I think I was far too young the first time I tried to watch a recording of that Broadway show at a friend's home where they were obsessed with Broadway. And I was like, this is
Oh my gosh.
not for kids.
Your
and
friends
not for me.
were me in high school. That's when I first saw this version of Into the Woods as well. I was in high school. Anyway, alas, we digress. Okay. So first is, I believe this is The Baker's Wife. I should definitely have double checked this, but here we go. First quote. People make mistakes holding to their own, thinking they're alone. What do we think? Good or bad advice?
Assuming it means that once you've made a mistake, you think you're the only person that could have made a mistake. So then you keep to yourself.
Yeah. And also people make mistakes when they think they have to be by themselves, holding to their own, thinking that they're alone. And then they're making these mistakes, not reaching out to partners or not reaching out to people.
Yeah. And asking for help. Yeah. I mean, I think this is 100% true. This is a classic area of growth for me. Personally, you could be an expert in relationships and still be like, no, it's fine. I've got this totally solo. Like, I'll just keep working very, very hard at this thing all by myself. So I do think this is something that people are, if that's the interpretation, goodness, yes. People do that all the time. Kids and adults. Like I was thinking adults first, but kids do this too.
Yeah. It's a good one. Sesson, what are you thinking?
Can we read the quote again? I want to.
People make mistakes holding to their own, thinking they're alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I definitely feel like there's some of us who are really hard on ourselves about anything, everything, and somehow feel like we should just naturally know how to engage everything in our lives, right? And do it well and do it beautifully and do it, without giving ourselves a lot of grace when we make mistakes and not always seeing it as an opportunity, right, to learn and to bring in other people. Yeah, and I think about particularly those folks who really don't feel like they have a support system in their lives or a person they could really trust to be vulnerable enough to say, I erred, or I felt like in this moment I didn't live up to something. Yeah,
I
that feeling
think
yeah.
I'm sorry, Susan, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to agree that I actually think clinically I see this more than I think we have great science to sort of support this, but I even see it amongst a lot of people who do have solid support systems. Like when you ask about it, they can readily acknowledge like, well, if I was open about how heavy this is for me to just go through on my own, they would be disappointed that I hadn't shared it sooner. They would be so eager to help. But also I'm not going to burden them. Like I have to do this on my own. And so I would say clinically, that's a theme that shows up so often with the patients I work with. And I don't know if there's like a great area of science to support this, but that's enough anecdotes for me to suggest that this is absolutely something that happens in relationships all the time.
Yeah.
A great quote that the baker and his wife have a wonderful arc in this a whole musical about being independent and fixing an issue independently, and then learning in the woods they have to come together in order to solve it. It's the only way they'll solve it is if they come together. So the next is I'm going to do two quotes from Red Riding Hood, one of my favorite characters in this musical. So one of them, okay, the first one is when she's on her way to Granny's house and she meets the wolf. And this is after she meets the wolf for the first time. She said, although scary is exciting, nice is different than good. What are we thinking? Sesson?
I have to process that a little bit.
Although scary is exciting, nice is different than good. So for me, that last part, nice is different than good, I always think about that, especially in my, like, not necessarily close relationships, but when I'm meeting someone for the first time or new relationships, that I just always remember nice is different than good. Someone can put on airs and they can be really kind to me or nice, but it also sometimes that is only the surface, and it doesn't mean that they're good or have good intentions, is how I interpret that.
Right. Nice can be polite or sometimes we call it like professional but it's not necessarily generous or ethical or
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it takes time to shift from really understanding how, like, nice is the way somebody shows up, right? And the good is more of an internal, like, state of being. And I don't think, and even, I don't know, I have this issue sometimes with determining, like, what is good, who is good, right? Like, I don't know that is something I should be in a position to ever judge, right? Because you never will really get to know all sides of somebody, and even the sides that are good that they struggle to show. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting statement. Makes me think a lot about that idea of what we get on the outside, but
maybe
how much there is to a person and how we don't always capture all of that.
So next from Red Riding Hood, I think this is the same song or a similar song or a reprisal of the song, but she's coming back from Granny's. Now I know, don't be scared. Granny is right, just be prepared. Isn't it nice to know a lot? And a little bit not. So that last part I always think about Red Riding Hood, like losing her innocent, like losing the childhood. Like, isn't it nice to know a lot? It's so good to know a lot. And then she's like, well, a little bit, not.
Yeah. Ignorance is bliss.
Sometimes, but then you get
Sure.
caught off guard and
You
you
get
get duped
eaten
by a
up.
wolf.
Yeah.
These are deep, PR. I'm like, I don't know that I
love
know
Sondheim.
how to like.
Oh, this is such a good.
in such a short period of time. My brain doesn't.
I'm sorry. It's such a good show. Highly recommended. I mean, I don't think I have any quotes from Cinderella. Or maybe I do later on. Yeah. But yeah, I like that one a lot. Thinking about, isn't it nice to know a lot? Because we're always thinking about knowledge. Maybe a little bit not. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
it's
also
a
sort
dilemma
of-
I definitely struggle with raising a child, right? I think a lot of us like, how much do we expose them to? How much do we prepare them? You know, especially like on issues around like social justice for me, like trying to prepare them for what the world will inevitably show them in some ways. And like, do I just give him that time now to not have to engage what will very clearly be something present in his life? Like, yeah. So for some kids, it's not an option not to know a lot. And for others, I don't know. And yeah.
Well, and just being, I mean, the juxtaposition there in that quote that you read about how important it is to be prepared. And part of being prepared is having all that information about how the world works, but also being prepared is not necessarily sufficient. Like, shit's still going to happen to you.
Yeah.
No matter how much work you do on yourself or how much you go into a situation, like there's all these other variables largely including other people and how they're going to act. And that is not always predictable.
Yeah. I think there's something too about when you do prepare, it's nice to help them figure out how to cope too with what the new information they have, right? Like, so it's not, you're just like, you see a lot of people who experience like anxiety and different symptoms when they have a lot of information and don't know what to do with it. And all of a sudden their sense of life feels like things are unsafe, right? Like, how do you help somebody cope with the truths that are out there and not always live in fear of that? And that's really important. Like, you can't just share things and not help somebody know how to be settled in that. But I think that's often what we do, and because we're often sharing things in a really reactive way. And so we're not always taking the information and saying like, here's how to be in it, how to sit in it and still be able to be all these other things, feel a sense of safety, engage the world, be active, be motivated, you know, and still see the world in all these really positive and also exciting ways, right? It's like living in both, helping them know how to live in all of it and not just in the fear of one day, right?
Yeah.
So the next one is the baker. It's a duet between the baker and the baker's wife. And I've already kind of talked a little bit about that arc. And this is kind of a quote of them kind of on the journey to kind of figuring out that arc. So this is the baker. It takes one to begin, but then once we've begun, it takes two of you. It's no fun, but what needs to be done, you can do when there's two of you. If I dare, it's because I'm becoming aware of us as a pair of us. You want me to read it again? Sarah, what are your thoughts?
It's that it's no fun piece. So without knowing these characters, it's sort of hard to place like what this relationship advice is really sort of coming out of. But it does sound sort of like what we were discussing earlier in terms of the need to sort of figure out how to work together as a couple and sort of how you each maybe can sort of bring your own strengths and your own efforts to like go through life, problem solve, negotiate, but that's not always easy and enjoyable.
It can be hard.
No, that seems like sort of, I guess, some of the essence of relationships. Interesting. Maybe I should revisit this musical. I don't know why I remember it just like being so stressful.
This feels stressful. So
I mean, they have to find a bunch of stuff in the woods together, and then The insight that Sondheim has in so many of his musicals and the lyrics that he writes is absolutely phenomenal. But he's written for a very, very long time. And he's also known to like have mentored tons of like a junior Broadway people. Like the person who wrote Rent, he was, kind of mentored him some. But anyway, Sondheim would tell a story that he was a closeted gay man for a very, very long time. And he wrote he wrote West Side Story, like a lot of good musicals, but didn't have the richness that some of his later stuff did. And he came out of the closet. And when he came out of the closet, he said he was able to access, because he wasn't keeping that secret so much, he was able to access so much more of his emotionality, of his thoughts, of his experiences. And after he came out and was an openly gay man, all of these brilliant musicals he was able to write, and he wrote, including Into the Woods, and access all of this emotionality and how to put words to it.
Yeah.
Cool. I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is Rapunzel's prince. So in this musical, there are two princes who in the first act are going after Rapunzel and Cinderella. And then the second act, they get married and decide they want two different princesses. So they're a little bit flighty, but also hilarious. Like there's somewhat of the comic relief in this story. I have a song called Agony, which is just hilarious, although different for each. So this is Rapunzel's prince. The harder to get, the better to have. The harder to get, the better to have. The harder to get, the better to have. What do we think? Good or bad advice? The harder to get, the better to have. Sesson?
I don't always agree with that. I mean, it sounds similar to the idea of, anything worth having. No, what's the saying? There's another saying. I'm so bad at my sayings. I don't even know why I bothered going down this lane. This road. See, I even said the wrong lane. So I think people think if something is hard, then something, at the end, good must come out of it, right? There's this, and I don't always agree with that. I think sometimes, especially if we're talking about relationship, the harder to get. I mean, if we're talking about being able to build commitment and trust and this and that there doesn't mean once you earn it like that, you're gonna, I don't know. It just feels
I agree with you completely. This idea that in order to have a good relationship, we have to go through a deep slog to get to it.
Yeah. There has to be a struggle there. And it's to get to the other side, it's well, that struggle may be a sign, right, of things that to come, or especially if they're not worked on, right? But I do think it doesn't apply to all the contexts, and especially with relationships, I think that could be problematic.
I think that's why I was saying earlier that I feel like we have done a disservice by broadly teaching people that relationships take work, because I think people are under the belief now, whether or not they feel like they want to put in the work, that relationships are always hard and they always can be agonizing, and it's my job to slog through it no matter what, and just continue to apply myself and put in more effort and put in more without ever sort of slowing down to pause and say, should it take this much work? Should it be this hard all the time? Should it be largely unsatisfying, but at least I'm loyal? I am more concerned that we have gone in some ways further in the other direction, where relationships should also be enjoyable and supportive. Some parts should come easy and you should feel loved and cared about, and that can fluctuate over time. But how hard it is to make it work is not a measure of the quality of the relationship. Those two things are not equal.
They are not equal. All right, last one, and then we're going to be done. This is from Cinderella. This is from the opening piece. Mother said be good, father said be nice. That was always their advice. So be nice, Cinderella, kind Cinderella, nice, good, good, nice. What's the good of being good when everybody else is blind and you're always left behind? And then it goes, so be kind, Cinderella, good. It keeps on going. And this is the beginning, and it's kind of humorous because she's doing her stepsister's hair. So she said, good, 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 nice, good, good, nice. And she's pulling their hair, and the stepsisters are. So anyway, she's talking to herself a little bit, but Cinderella point of view, what do we think? Good or bad advice, Sesson?
I mean, that last part sort of strikes me a bit. What's the good of being good when everyone else is blind and you're always
left behind?
Yeah, it's sort of sad. I think if we're living to be good for the sake of other people noticing or to attract things into our lives, I don't know that that feels like genuine. And like, I think we should all strive to do good and be good because it's what we want and need for ourselves instead of like attracting someone into our lives. I mean, that's also a great outcome of it, but it's not the reason. And I don't know if I'm interpreting that as they intended or how you all are interpreting it, but that's sort of what it reminds me of. It's like to live, I think your life according to the values and beliefs that are benefit you and your community and like your family, and doing that instead of looking to fill the void of a partner, right?
What are your thoughts?
I heard it as more like describing toxic relationships, like relationships where people are constantly taking advantage of you. I'm also thinking about it in the context of the traditional Cinderella story, where she is abused for most of her childhood and at least part of her adult life by these family members who are treating her so horrendously that when I read that story, I wonder where CPS was and why she couldn't escape sooner. So I do think that when people are abusive or neglectful and don't give you the same kind of regard that you're giving them, it is a very good reason to question why you continue to persist in putting work into that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think both of what you're saying could potentially be an interpretation of this too, and like lead to good advice, certainly all along. Well, if anything, I hope that this segment has made you both curious to watch the musical.
Agenda. This was your agenda.
Always Sondheim for life. So as always, thanks for listening to Attached. Remember, call us, email us, and get at us on the social medias about any relationship advice you've received and you're wondering whether to follow or pass on. We cannot wait to talk about it.